Personality disorders, historical epidemiology. Namaste. Epidemiology of personality disorders over history is an esoteric area, and we explore it today with psychoanalysis consultant Dr. Himanshu Vaidyaji. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Sir, how about we starting with a general view on epidemiology of personality disorders over history?
It's a very interesting area to really go into as to how, across different historical periods, the occurrence, intensity, and the structure of personality disorders has been. Often we talk about causation in psychoanalysis and in mental health area in general as being governed by the genetic or the bio, the psycho, meaning what is happening in the family, and the socio. So we look at three broad areas of causation: bio, psycho, socio. But usually we don't go deep into the socio aspect of it. Much of our analysis in psychotherapy, by and large, is based upon psycho. Rarely we go to socio. So it's a very interesting area to go into, that how social changes can change the occurrence of PD in case of pure PD, the occurrence of mixed PD in case of mixed PD, the intensity of either, and in case of mixed PD, the arrangement. What comes in front and what goes to back, or how they are stacked up in that constellation of PD. So it's a very interesting area to go into. However, there are some difficulties of going into this area. The first difficulty is definitional. Often cultures normalize PD.
True.
Cultures say that this is something that is just his unique nature. There's nothing pathological about it. And that is very situational from country to country. It's also situational from one century to another. Take, for example, if you live apart top 50 cities of India, and you really go to what is called the rural India, where India actually lives, and create a definition of histrionicity based upon what they think is histrionicity, and apply it to South Korea, which is so caught up in looking good, impressing each other, doing something stylish, that by the standards of the rural India today, much of South Korea will look histrionic. But within South Korea, they see it as very normal. Similarly, if you go to rural India and you look at martial communities, which are governed largely by very patriarchal cultures, very masculine cultures, very war oriented, strength oriented cultures, honor oriented cultures. In that culture, what a man thinks of as his normal rights, being a man, can easily be seen as entitlement or narcissistic by somebody who is growing up in a more equal culture, say Sweden or UK or USA. So the first problem is definitional, that cultures have a tendency to normalize personality disorders, and therefore the first problem is definitional. Are cultures ready, or have cultures in the historical periods been open to have a clear definition of personality disorders? Second, if you define a personality disorder, the second problem comes of stability. That you have DSM 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and let us say you come to 4 and you say in 3 you had 12 disorders and now we want only 10. So either the other two have to be removed or they have to be consumed by some other disorder. So that brings in the whole point of stability of definition. Now, once you have a clearly defined disorder and it is stable over time, then comes the point of collecting data, that have historically we collected data. And if we have not, then we can start from today. But if you have these three things in place, a clear definition, a stable definition, and collection of data, then we can have a very fruitful study of this very important phenomena, which we know by experience is correct. Just a question of proving it on paper using statistics and making the uh, unofficial official. But in reality, we all know it is correct. Right? And we have this famous uh, writings by Kohut, which we'll come to in a moment, how social conditions change the type of patients you get in the clinic. And that is true also of personality disorders. Now, when we come to slightly more complicated situation of a mixed personality disorder, there we have the problem that first we'll have to define it, keep it stable, and collect data on different types of mixed personality disorders. And then we need data not only on occurrence, but also on intensity. Right? Because society and culture will not only affect occurrence, but also intensity. And in case of mixed personality disorder, they will impact not only occurrence and intensity, but also arrangement in that constellation. What will come in the front, what will go in the back, and inter-PD transfer, not only inter-PD transfer wholesale, but inter-PD transfer of intensity. That certain cultures will not allow a certain type of PD, but they are more lenient to another kind of PD. So if the entire PD cannot shift from one to the other, maybe the intensity shifts from one to the other. Maybe the arrangement shifts in a way that the more acceptable comes in the front. So here we are looking at three things: the causation, the intensity, and the arrangement. And then comes inter-PD transfer and inter-PD intensity transfer. And all of this can be studied if we have data upon this of a stable period. Now, there are two ways of looking at it, qualitatively and quantitatively. One is, as I said, we can study with the help of data. Whatever data, if we have, we can put our minds to it. And if not 100% with 100% accuracy, with some degree of accuracy, 60-70%, we can definitely study, and we should study. It's a very important area. Second approach will be qualitative, that we have the notes and writings of all the psychotherapists. And they were situated in certain social conditions. Now we can look at those social conditions and we can look at those writings and we connect the two and we'll end up with a very good qualitative study. It does not mean that the qualitative study will not be any useful. It may be less rigorous and less hard science, but it will definitely give us a rich harvest of insights and ideas of the historical epidemiology of personality disorders. It's a very interesting area to study because it tells us about the link of culture and society to personality disorders in particular and mental health in general. And that in turn opens up an area. How do we have a systems approach in terms of the social conditions and culture? How do we design that to reduce mental health problems in general and personality disorders in particular?
So, taking this discussion further, like if we take a few examples, I have this doubt that when we talk about hysteria, probably in those days when Freud introduced the concept of hysteria, sir, women were not that empowered. And it was a disguised, underdeveloped, fragile narcissism shown in women as a hysteria. And now, if we see, women are equally showing very strong characteristics of narcissism. Or also at the same time, there is some shift happening. So, can we say that in the last century, hysteria got replaced by narcissism?
That is slightly yet to be tested claim to make. But what we can do is we can look deeper into the nuances of this idea. It's a very good idea to explore. So let us look at the nuances of it. The first is the constitution of the idea of hysteria. Because we see the idea of hysteria very prominent in the history of psychoanalysis, especially in the writings of Freud, because Freud began with studies on hysteria.
जी.
And psychoanalysis developed essentially in the process of trying to heal hysteria. Hysteria, strictly speaking, is not a personality disorder. It is actually a category name for a variety of psychological sicknesses. For example, when Freud uses the word hysteria, what does he cover by that term? He covers medically unexplained pains, fits, convulsions, altered states of consciousness, anesthetic states, like somebody does not feel anything in this part of the body. It is almost like put under anesthesia, permanent anesthesia. Convulsions, vomiting, uh, what we would call psychosis today, uh, loss of vision, loss of hearing, dramatic behavior, fits, tics, convulsions, anorexia, loss of appetite. Right? All this was put under a broad term hysteria.
Which partly nowadays are under the conversion disorder or somatic disorders.
Correct. Correct. So, as you rightly said, what is covered under hysteria will go in different chapters of DSM today. And many of the chapters will not be chapters of personality disorder. So, some part of what is called hysteria will go into the chapter of personality disorder, and a large part of what is hysteria in Freud's age will go in different chapters of DSM, including, as you rightly said, some will go in conversion disorder. Now, there is one part of hysteria which overlaps with histrionicity, which has to do with seduction, which has to do with something dramatic, which has to do with something which is attention seeking, which has to do something with trying to overcome the early life neglect, the early life dismissal and rejection.
So, in Jungian way, to simplify that, archetype of seductress or
Correct,
seductive
correct,
person.
correct, correct. Right. So the archetype of seductress is activated uh, because of dismissal, ignorance, of being told you are not good enough to have our attention. You are not good enough to have our admiration. You are not good enough to have our acceptance. And therefore, the reaction comes to that in terms of the histrionicity. Now, if we look at the cause, again, the cause also is different. Hysteria, as was known in those days, essentially was a drive problem. That there was a strong drive, strong repression, and the outcome of that, an occasional explosion or a chronic explosion of hysteria. So it's essentially a drive problem as Freud experienced it. Histrionicity, as we know it today, is largely an early life object relations problem. So the causality of the two also is different, largely, not in all the cases, but most cases. What is of interest is if we just look at the confluence of the two and we look at the transfer, right? Then one thing is sure, that what comes up at the confluence of the two, histrionicity and hysteria, the way it was expressed then and the way it is expressed now, if we look at that, and if we look at narcissism, then we can say two things. One, today what we see as histrionic is not essentially the type of convulsions and epileptic fits we used to have. So there
True.
is a change. There is a shift in the way the unregulated
Symptomology.
impulse, yeah, unregulated impulse is manifesting itself. So there is a very big change between how it was manifested in the hysterical times and now how it is manifested in the histrionic times. So in terms of the manifestation, we definitely see a shift. And then the second part of it comes up, that is there a shift from histrionicity to narcissism. And the most important point that we are trying to explore today is that all these shifts, are they related to society and culture? Is society and culture responsible for these shifts? So this is what can set the stage rolling, and we can go deeper into the causation part of it. That the three important parts in the PD area. One is occurrence. Right? Second is intensity. The third is the arrangement in case of mixed PDs. And the fourth is the transfer from one PD to the other. And the fifth is transfer of intensity from one to the other in case of mixed. So all of this can happen because of variety of reasons. And today we are focusing on one particular reason, that of society and culture. And we can go deeper into it, that how society and culture can play a role in this complex phenomena of the PD constellation.
So let's dive deeper into this export of cargo from PD to another. What is governing there? What are the different aspects there?
We can look at some possibilities connecting PD and society, personality disorders and society. The first argument can be that personality disorders and the entire range of personality disorder phenomena, be it of intensity, be it of arrangement in mixed PD, be it transfer from one to the other, or be it transfer of intensity from one to the other in case of mixed. All of these are genetic and biochemical, and society has no role to play. This can be one argument, which of course we don't agree with, and therefore we go into the other part of the argument. The second possibility can be that over a historical period, two PDs can rise, both of them are rising. Third possibility is both of them are going down. Fourth possibility is one is going up, second is going down. Fifth possibility is all of the above can happen with transfer or without transfer. It's quite possible that two PDs are going up, but there is no transfer from one to the other. And second possibility, two PDs are going up, but partly it is because absolutely this is going up, and partly transfer from this to this is happening. So this is an absolute increase and a transfer. So all these combinations will play out. That we have a situation, two PDs go up independent of each other. There is a situation, two PDs go down independent of each other. Third situation, both are going up, but there is transfer from one to the other, apart from the absolute rise. So if both are going up by 100, this is going up absolutely by 100. But this is going up 50, and another 50 is a transfer. And the first one obviously has to go up 150 to have a rise of 100 to account for the transfer. You can have another situation where both are going up, but there is a transfer of intensity, not the transfer of numbers, because of the social conditions. That what is more acceptable can manifest with more intensity. And then we come to mixed PDs, where society influences what will come in the front and what will go back. And it will also influence what will have more intensity and what will be more repressed. Often we can have a situation that something which is more repressed actually has more intensity, and that will come up last in therapy. What is most florid and in the front may not have the highest intensity. This is counterintuitive, but often I have seen that in practice, that what is most repressed, right, has the highest intensity, and what appears most florid does not have actually the highest intensity. So this, all of this can happen. All this permutation and combination can happen. Now, causation is something which is very important, and it can happen in two ways. One, we can have a situation where just there is an early life event, say of object loss, and the phenomena starts. Second, there can be an early life event of object loss, and then over a long period of time, the cultural learning is such that the intensity is reduced or increased of what was precipitated in the early life loss. And if in the early life loss a mixed PD was precipitated, then you will not only have over a long period of time intensity reduction or increase, but also the arrangement of the PD.
Hmm.
And then comes the question of transfer from one to the other or transfer of intensity from one to the other. So all of this can happen because of social factors. So if we want to go deeper, we can go into those deeper factors of how society is at play.
So yes, as the opening statement itself talks about how society can govern these PDs or manage better with these PDs. What is happening with regard to the society in these transfers?
Society can act in three large ways. The first is just long period of learning by culture. Right? So what happens from 5 to 15 becomes very important there. That society is acting slowly over a long period of time, inhibiting some PD, accelerating some PD, making shift from one to the other, making shift of intensity between the two, or in mixed PD, rearranging the arrangement, or allowing transfer of intensity from one to the other in that constellation. Now, society can do, as I said, in three ways. One is long time cultural training over a period of time, from 5 to 15. Second, society can also create an effect by the way child upbringing is practiced in a community. That if the culture and society is such that typical child upbringing practices are practiced, that in turn can lead to the early life loss feelings and therefore more PDs. For example, in some cultures, you will have this practice that after a few months of the birth, the mother starts going away from the baby and working, and somebody else takes care, or the baby is supposed to be on one's own. Right? The object loss uh, created by such cultures is very high. Or, say, the whole culture of putting the baby in the back seat of the car. Now that all of that very early in life, say the baby is 6 months old, and you put him alone in the back seat of the car, or to keep the baby in the crash and start working very soon after delivery. Now these child upbringing practices, which are also cultural in nature, they are specific to each community. So they can also increase or reduce the creation of PDs or the intensity of the PDs or arrangement and shift of intensity in case of uh, mixed personality disorders, or also shift from one to the other. So
I remember
first,
one of the articles I had read somewhere that from where this concept started coming from, where the mothers stopped sleeping with the children, rather they started putting the newborns in cribs and cots. Because during somewhere around Second World War, there were two psychologists who did not do a proper research, but they were funded by someone, as more women were needed as laborers during industrial revolution also, so more man force was needed, so women also started going out, so they formulated this, they framed this theory that if you sleep with the child will have a different kind of impact on the personality. Actually it is the other way around.
correct.
Until date, doctors and pediatricians immediately after birth, they keep recommending that don't go sleep with your child. Your child is at risk of suffocation and everything. While in rural areas where this pediatric approach was not instilled, the children were much healthier with regard to self-regulation, because the co-regulation was very easily dealt by mother.
So
So
Klein, Kohut, Winnicott have brought to us the criticality of early life presence of the mother. And we all know that this whole idea of the child being a micro man, as though he comes completely made, just he increases in size, that's a wrong model. The child actually is a product in the making. He is a work in progress, not only at the psychological level, even at the biological level. We
True.
know how the immune system formation also partly happens only after the child drinks the first milk for a few days of the mother. And we also know how the absence of internalization of a good, reliable, stable object in the first 6 months of the child's life impacts his own immune system. So, this
Rather,
is
these
some
days when formula fed babies are there, I sometimes go back to the Kleinian statement of good, reliable, stable object, not so good, but only stable object.
correct, correct. So, you don't have the good, reliable, stable object, you only have a stable object. And that can be taken up to be a dead or non responsive, non reciprocating object. Right? It's a
True.
recipe for secondary narcissism.
True.
So, Winnicott used to say, because he was sent to the boarding school at 7 and he felt it very traumatic. So, he used to say, I won't send a dog to a boarding school at 7. So, this is something. So, we were talking about how society can actually, in terms of process,
Hmm.
affect the whole PD spectrum. So, one, as we said, somebody can say it's all genetic, society has no role. That's one argument. Second argument, if we say society has a role, then the question is how will the role be played? What will be the process of it? So the first will be the child upbringing practices will be such that even though the mother is at home, culturally, the child will feel far more abandonment and object loss. Second will be that the social structure is such that the mother has no option but to go out and work. There are economic expediencies, and therefore, society from outside can work. That the society creates such an economic situation that mothers have no choice but to go to work, and therefore, the manufacturing process of personality disorder that starts working in 3 shifts.
True.
That is what we see in the Western societies today, that every mother is a working mother, and we see the whole epidemic of personality disorders. And this is very important to know because societies can rise or fall based upon personality disorders. Today, if you see, the fall of the West, which has started, is essentially because of the woke personality disorder.
True.
I have been saying it for long that DSM needs to recognize woke personality disorder and woke psychosis. But the West is on a completely different train, what we call in Sanskrit Vinash Kale Viparita Buddhi. Ki now that the karmic time has come, they won't listen to any sound of reason and they will go to their own perdition. And the route to that perdition will start with a personality disorder, which is the woke personality disorder. And this is true for many cultures which fall or rise as empires. That the rise of empires starts with some productive personality disorders, which should not be called a disorder. Let us call it assets, productive personality assets. And the fall starts with some disorder becoming epidemic. Doesn't matter if it's recognized by DSM-5 or not, but this always is the case that the fall usually starts if the fall is not natural. If you're not talking of an empire collapsing by an earthquake or
Hmm.
climate change or something or a disease, if there's a normal historical process on the normal cycles of history, then you see the fall of any empire starting with an epidemic of PD,
True.
right? Which usually is lack of ethics in some way or the other. And then the collapse slowly begins. So, what we have is one, the child upbringing practices are such that early life object loss is experienced. Two, social conditions are such that people have no choice but to allow object losses to happen. Three, historical conditions are such that a child uh, relates to very few people because many have been killed in some tragedy or the other. And then we have combinations. You can have social conditions where it promotes early life loss and it also promotes over the time learning to fortify those personality disorders. Or you will have a situation where the early life loss has happened and the social conditions are such that they reduce the intensity of what has happened early life. So then you have combinations early life loss over the time learning, right? Increasing the PD, or early life loss but over the time learning reducing the PD, early life loss but good uh, learning over time, and therefore in mixed PDs some PDs become very very insignificant. So all these combinations uh, will play out, and this is how society will play a role, either directly by child upbringing or by creating conditions of work or by learning, and all learning over time and all the combinations of the three. So this is how society actually works, right? And the last is how much society gives importance to the child and mother being together and being surrounded by nature, mythology, tradition, and people. If this combo is at work, we will see the minimum of personality disorder develop.
Also, sometimes as a psychoanalysis analysis enthusiast, I always, whenever I try to understand the changes in society, uh, if you go to Freudian psychosexual developmental stages, the timelines which he had been mentioning there remained almost for a century there. But in last 2 decades, due to these diapers and bottle-fed babies, and the duration with breast and potty training and non-availability of the primary caregiver, these phases have shifted, including the phallic stage and other last stages where the physiological clock has also shifted. Now the puberty is hitting in at somewhere around 10 to 11. So this condensation of the timelines with regard to the physiological development versus psychological development, there's a lot of overlap and a lot of things to catch up with in one's own psyche.
Right.
What happens to this entire system? Will that because the phenomena are at place, they are playing their roles, but physiologically the body is moving somewhere else. Is this going to yield to more hybrid PD forms or overlapping more of it? Where do you see it?
Um, this is where the present is, that because of the working mother's phenomena, because of very few people to relate to in early life, and even later on, we are living in a closed doors policy, a society which is governed by a closed doors policy, that we don't know who the neighbor is, what he is doing. So earlier we would not have any privacy. Today we don't have any relationship. It's the other extreme. So from one problem we have jumped to the other. The golden mean was in between, but we usually jump from one end of the continuum to the second. So what is it leading to is, one, it is leading to fragile narcissism. So one part of it is fragile narcissism. The second part of it is too early experiences of deep emotional and sexual time for which the person is not ready.
Mm.
And therefore, you see, by the time somebody is 25, he looks almost as though he has passed through a midlife crisis of 42. The kind of pessimism,
True.
cynicism, resignation, despondency, disappointment, resignation that you used to see post midlife, now you have at 25. So the midlife crisis has become a quarter life crisis because of this whole fragile narcissism coming in, one, and two, too early, too deep
Mm.
experiences, and too many of them that you are having because if you start having real deep relationships right from 15 and you want to marry at 25, then your marriage actually is a fourth marriage. Three marriages and three divorces already have happened. It is just that they are not official. But in reality, there is no difference in the intensity of an official marriage and an unofficial marriage, the way things are going. So actually, the first marriage is the fourth marriage now. And no wonder that after three divorces, you are going to be disappointed. And therefore, you don't see that optimism, that cheerfulness, that sturdiness, that resilience in uh, the youth today, which I saw in my own youth. So that has to do with many things, and one of them is very early life object losses, too few object internalizations, too many experiences too deep too soon, uh, absence of adequate connect to nature, mythology, tradition, and people, and absence of uh, slight hardness in life. Life has become far too comfortable, and therefore, one reason for fragility is too much comfort. The hardship or the threat brings out the strong part of man. So now you
Make
have
them more resilient to both
so now
external and internal
correct. So now
components.
you don't have men and women. You have overaged boys and overaged girls. Right? So this is how the whole shift has happened, and that shift also reflects in the way patients come. That you have a large section of uh, people born after 2000 coming to you, and always by and large you see a fragile narcissism at the core, where the ability to take on stress of any type is extremely limited, very low. The fragile narcissism at the core and the high entitlement at the core, and this back being what I call the bliss at the breast, the regression to that state in some way or the other is very common.
Also, like earlier, people used to have six, seven children. The narcissism wouldn't take place in all of them, but now there is just one single child, or maybe maximum two children in the family. The kind of importance they get, the kind of comfort they get, there is no healthy competition.
Correct.
So, a lot of other dynamics are also at play.
So money has gone up, number of children have gone down, safety has gone up, technology has gone up, and therefore it's just too comfortable, to entitlement providing that the robustness, the fortitude just doesn't come up. And to add to it, fragile narcissism, and as I said, too deep experiences, too many, too soon.
So, has the social change and type of patients we get been commented upon by any of those experts in those era?
Yeah. Cohut was the first to really write extensively about it. Jung wrote about it in a partial way. Jung did comment upon the type of patients he saw and the type of patients Freud saw as being very different. That many of Jung's patients, in terms of pathology, also there was a lot of difference. Jung saw far more psychotics, Freud saw far more neurotics, and Jung saw far more people with existential crisis, individuation crisis than Freud did. Freud actually saw patients as what we would call patients. Many of the Jung's patients were actually patients of what we would call an existential crisis. In India, you don't even get such patients. Just as you don't get mild patients in India, you always get moderate or strong. You don't get patients with mild pathology. So, same way, very few patients would come to us and say, I am here for the Socratic motivation of going into myself in a pure psychoanalytic way and not confining to the psychoanalytic psychotherapeutic way. So that way, Jung had commented to some extent, but extensive comments on effect of society on the type of patients we see and therefore on the type of pathology generated in society was done by Kohut.
Okay.
And Kohut said that his patients were very different from Freud's patients. Freud's patients essentially were uh, drive repression patients, and Kohut's patients essentially were early life object loss patients or early life mirroring failure patients or early life empathy, idealization, failure patients. And the two are very different. The social reason why it happened is also very interesting, how this shift happens.
Mm.
Kohut no longer found drive repression patients, as Freud found, because society had become liberal. When sexuality is normalized, there isn't much to repress. And therefore, the drive repression patients of Freud's were very less to be seen. And with it, hysteria went down. That what was taboo once got normalized.
Right.
And when the flow was normalized, it was opened up. People lived it out. They had no longer the need to repress. And therefore, those who are becoming patients, because they had to repress, that category no longer became patients.
Rather, these days, there needs to be a category where there is less of repression and too much of, I don't know if this is the right word, expression. Too much
Right.
of liberty to live out everything with freedom in the society also has a different kind of induced psychosis.
Correct. So this is the problem of too much and too little. There is too much repression and we have one type of problems. There's too little repression, we have another kind of problem. And therefore, the whole idea always is to find the golden mean, the optimization, the healthy middle. And that is always true, that human beings always jump from one extreme to the other. Right? Whereas they should be finding and sustaining the healthy middle. It's like blood pressure. Too low is low BP, too high is high BP, in between is the healthy zone. But to be in the healthy zone and to sustain there is something our species finds it very difficult to do. And our species is very fond of jumping from one extreme to the other. That's the nature of our species on a mass scale. So, uh, when the taboo was normalized, those who were becoming patients, because they could not live out their desire, which was called a taboo, they no longer had to become patients, they got normalized. And
Right.
so the drive repression pathology went away. And what we saw was, just as one development in society from Freud to Kohut was that the sexual attitudes liberalized, the expression of emotions liberalized. So, what was once bottled up was no longer bottled up, and therefore, those who were going sick because of this bottling up, they were no longer sick. That pathology went away. But another development happened, that people started going to work, both parents, and people started living in small apartments in the cities. And the whole idea of individualism, nuclear family, and privacy came in. So mother started working very early. The child would lose the mother very early, and therefore early life object loss became a normal phenomenon. That practically every child now will experience early life object loss, and therefore will have some sort of a fragile PD or a fragile constitution. And second, uh, the connect with the society went down. People were no longer in touch with nature, tradition, mythology, other people. So there is an old saying which says it takes a village to bring up a child. Now the child remained and the village disappeared. And this led to a second problem, that we no longer had the drive repression problem. Now we had an early life object loss problem.
So,
And therefore, Kohut termed two names for it. He called uh, the Freud's patient as the guilty man. He was guilty because the drives were repressed. And he had desires which society said you ought not had to have. So Kohut called Freud's patients as the guilty man, and Kohut called its own patients as the tragic man. So there was a movement from the guilty man to the tragic man, from drive repressed patients to object loss patients because of social developments. So we see how the Personality disorders which you saw before and what you saw later were very different. We will now see a preponderance of narcissistic and schizoid personality disorders, and we see a lowering of the histrionicity personality disorder. So there is a movement, and very roughly, if you speak, it's a movement from hysteria to narcissism. Very roughly, if you speak, not very accurately, but in broad strokes, if you speak.
Also, from the evidence based written work of Freud and then later on schools of psychoanalysis, at least that movement is there, very clear
Right. Correct.
in their writings.
Correct.
So, exploring deeper, is there a fluid state inside between trauma and creation of PD as you talk about this um, optimized zone? Then we have this some transitional phase, right? So, for this creation of PD or having created a PD, transferring into a different PD, is something happening in between?
It's a very complicated question because this gets into the core, the formation part of PD development, or rather the formation of a PD. Say, for example, the mother starts working at 3 months of age, and the child starts experiencing object loss the first day,
Mm.
and the child will cry. Probably there will be some caregiver who may not be as attentive as the mother, may not replace the mother, but provide some care to the child. And he cries the first day. So, should we believe that by the end of the first day he will develop personality disorder, or that after a few days he will develop personality disorder because in the evening the mother will be back? But as we know, uh, traumatic things are not easy to reverse. When what was traumatic, the opposite of it happens. Like if you beat up somebody, he gets traumatized, and after that, if you love him, right, the trauma does not get reversed by that opposite experience. Trauma has this tendency of perpetuating itself and being resistant to any modification later on. That's what creates the chronic nature of it. So, does society have the time to come between the traumatic event and the formation of PD? So, is the PD formed the very first day the child experiences object loss? Is it formed after 3 days? Is it formed after 8 days? Or is it formed in a protoform and only after long experience do we see the PD developing? Now, this is a very complicated question to answer, but what we know from experience is this, that we will have to get into three types of personality disorders in terms of intensity: mild, moderate, and severe. In case of severe, it is so much inside out that society can play a role only in starting off the object loss, the early life object loss. That maybe the mother has to go to work because economic conditions are such, or maybe the mother has to leave the child because cultural practices are such. But the over the time learning of the society will not have a strong role to play in case of severe personality disorders. So in severe personality disorders, it is essentially the early life object loss, which will determine the occurrence of personality disorder, the type of personality disorder, and in case of mixed personality disorder, the stacks which constitute the mixed personality disorder. And in severe personality disorder, it is very difficult for society to shift personality disorder from A to B, or even to shift it within the mixed personality disorder context from top to bottom. So what the society can do over a long period of time is the shift of intensity within the mixed personality disorder, right? But largely playing no role otherwise.
Okay.
Now, when we come to the moderate personality disorder, something else is at play. Society can't do much in the formation, but society can play a large role in the development of intensity, and in case of mixed personality disorder, the arrangement of it. And society can also play a very vital role in shift of intensity in case of mixed personality disorder.
Also, if we go by the Kleinian approach, where she mentions that any moment uh, there can be a external trauma trigger which takes you back to that initial thing. So there, the society has a direct approach.
Correct. But what will happen there is that we will be looking at a new addition to an existing personality
Oh,
disorder.
okay. No, for
Because,
example, many of the PDs they stand out somewhere around age 13, 14, 15, especially which has more of pathological components like obsessive compulsive personality disorder or those kinds. So isn't it there is a reinforcement of that small t's contributing to a bigger T?
yeah, so uh, in case of severe personality disorder, the type of personality disorder, right, the formation of it, whether it
Hmm.
will happen or not, if it will happen, what type it will happen, and what will be the intensity of it. Now, over a long period of time, the intensity can be adjusted either ways to a minimum degree by what society does
Okay.
in severe. When you come to moderate, then the formation, whether it will happen or not, and if it will happen, what will it be, still is outside of society. But the intensity can largely be determined by society, far more than in case of severe. So in severe, if you can adjust it
Fair
plus
enough.
minus 10%, here you can go plus minus 25%. And in case of
Mm-hmm.
mixed, you can even shift the arrangement. And you can also facilitate intensity transfer within the constellation in case of mixed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in case of mild, society can play a role to the extent of even the occurrence or non-occurrence.
Hmm.
It can play a role in case of intensity. It can play a role in case of transfer from one to the other, or the transfer of intensity, and arrangement in case of the stack. Right? Now, in the mixed PD stack, when we are looking at top or bottom, even in moderate cases, the shift is difficult. But when you look at the layers in between, society can go to the extent not only of intensity transfer, but even of a transfer from one to the other.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right?
Makes sense.
Now, another important point is this. When you want to do an epidemiological study, right, data is very important. And for data, you have to find the PD. Now, what is interesting is, in case of mixed personality disorders, the presenting disorder you can count, but how do you count those who are behind it? And how do you count which is at the bottom? So often these personality disorders, they don't even get counted. It is only in long-term therapy that they come up. And often we see, I have seen personally, that what is at the bottom often has the highest intensity.
True.
Right? And the patient never came to it for healing that part. He was also
That
not
part.
aware. And when we apply DSM criteria, those criteria are not satisfied. So we also don't suspect it. So what in DSM we would earlier call NOS, right, or other specified or unspecified today, that you have only one or two characteristics, not the qualifying characteristics. So adequately it will not qualify for a disorder. You will have only one or two characteristics, but they will be so strong that the overall intensity of that disorder will be stronger than even the presenting disorder. And that is where the
Right.
counting problem will happen and the shift problem will happen. Because if we don't count in the first place, how will we measure the shift? Because what does not exist cannot shift.
Right.
So first we have to count it, and that is where counting in mixed personality disorders is very important. And that requires somebody from a deep therapy area rather than somebody just with DSM knowledge going out to do statistical work. That will give completely wrong results. So this is how the impact of society is on all the three categories of personality disorders: mild, moderate, severe. And all the three, you can have two categories: pure and mixed. And we saw how the combinations of the six work out.
So, how do we reconcile then the phenomena of mixed PD with the epidemiological journey?
It's a very good question, because the moment you come to mixed PD, there are some unique problems. The first
Mm,
problem is knowing what is below the presenting PD. Right? How do we know? Because in all probability, in most cases, the person will not qualify for multiple personality disorders. In some
right,
cases, they will qualify, but in most cases, they will qualify for one which is florid and in front. Others, you will qualify, under qualify, and you will only have one or two traits. So the first is that. The second is we have to study not only transfer from one PD to the other, we also have to study the transfer of arrangement. That society will also influence what comes in the front and what does not come in the front. So one situation is, say, let us say somebody has narcissism at the top, below it is histrionicity, below it is OCPD, below it is dependence. Now, one thing society can do is, society can so stigmatize one that in case of mild, let us say one gets converted into the other. So there is a complete
right.
shift. But there are two other influences society can have, that there may not be a complete shift, but there may be a rearrangement. What comes on the top, what becomes number two, what becomes number three.
Shuffle takes place.
Shuffle takes place. Or there may be shift of intensity.
Mm.
Right? That society,
Activation, deactivation.
yeah, the intensity will be different. That the
Okay.
disorder will remain, but the intensity will get transferred. Right?
Also, I've seen sometimes this activation and deactivation when there is a holistic approach being applied to certain patients with multiple mixed PDs, like homeopathy and the healing modality of psychoanalysis itself. There are phases where the secondary narcissism goes down and OCPD character comes up, or the other, suppose somebody has reported with bipolar disorder. Owing to different stages of bipolarity, also the subsequent PDs show up and fade out. So there's a lot of activation, deactivation,
Correct.
and it's such a fix for the therapist what to handle first, because every time new material is being generated in case
Correct.
of mixed PDs.
Correct. So my experience is this. Let me share something, a golden rule with you.
Okay.
In case of mixed PDs, uh, when there is a crisis, say for example, there is no crisis. If there is no crisis, you start with the presenting PD, right? What is florid,
Mm.
right? If there is no crisis, you start with what is most troubling to the person.
Right.
It may not be the presenting, but it's most troublesome,
Mm.
because nothing is present. Nothing is florid. When something is florid, start with the florid. When nothing is florid, start with what is most troubling.
Mm.
Occasionally, you will not even have a choice, because the way the material comes up in therapy, automatically it leads you to something, right?
True.
And you cannot undo all that he says. You can't change the direction of the session from where the
Every
patient
time.
wants to go.
Mm. Mm.
But in long-term therapy of PD, right, when things are not florid, when the patient is not really taking you to some place, then I would always say check for dependence. And if one or two characteristics of dependence are very strong,
Okay.
then first address dependence.
I got it
This I have learned
completely.
after years of dealing with PD, that if nothing is pressing and dependence is present in that constellation of mixed PD,
Mm.
go
Mm.
first for dependence. Because
Which can be
Dependence is
tricky because in
uh,
therapy, you create a healthy dependence and then you wean them off.
mm,
Uh, in the beginning, again, you are catering to their dependence personality disorder, and then in a healthy way, you undo it.
true, but you also bring into discussion their dealings with other people, and that is where the cure often lies. That
The point of reference would be outside the therapy
uh,
application world. Okay.
that you can talk to them. That often it happens that people, if they are with them and they are safe and they are admiring, that is the cure. And the moment they face loneliness or loss, they go completely disoriented. So we come to a situation where people are the cure, or let me say, good people are the cure, and loneliness is what precipitates difficulty. And if this is seen somewhere, that dependence is one of the many in the stack, then,
Hmm.
and there is nothing florid, then start with dependence. So this is the golden rule I have found in working with the mixed PDs.
Thank you for bringing that, sir, and sharing here.
In fact, I had a lot of uh, florid bipolar, presenting bipolar, and then after some time when the healing happened, it was no longer florid, right? uh, OCPD traits came in, and after OCPD, what I really found at the root was actually dependence.
Very similar case with me also. The moment you said dependence, and I just realized, yes, oh, I missed it. It was there.
Correct. And when I started addressing dependence, that is where the patient said, now I feel you really understand.
And for me, she said, I think I need lesser sessions now. All right. But even today, we few can make out hidden PDs, and then in therapy, how do they take it further? As you mentioned that strongest PD may be the most repressed and not in front, and then there's a shuffling happening. Then society has a role. What role society has there in this shuffling and formation?
Yeah, two aspects of what you asked. First, you correctly said few people can make up mixed PDs, and there are many issues here. The first issue is DSM itself. The way DSM is structured, it gives the idea of independent standalone PDs, that one can have either one, and if you have one, you cannot have others. In rare cases, you will have multiple diagnoses. But DSM gives this idea that some of the PDs actually are mutually exclusive. For example, narcissism and dependence, that they seem to be two ends of a continuum. They cannot be
Hmm.
together. But
Hmm.
we find both of them entangled together, right? In many of the patients,
True.
that there is one in the front and second at the back. You are working with narcissism at the depth, you find dependence. You are working with dependence, after some time, narcissism comes up. So the whole uh, structure of the chapter of PD in DSM has to undergo a change. And we have one discussion, one video on that on our channel, call for revision of DSM-5.
Reason
And
five.
there we have talked about the personality disorder chapter. So this is one, that people grow up with DSM, right? And therefore they are sort of possessed by the spirit of DSM, which is good in many ways and not good in some ways. And the not good part comes up here, that most people don't even have an idea of a mixed PD, that mixed PD can happen. So generally what they say, it is one PD and traits of another PD.
Right.
But mixed PD is something which is not even on the horizon for many, number one. Number two, when it is there, right, it's very difficult to decipher what is the arrangement of that constellation, because all
Hmm.
we know is the top, the presenting front. Behind that, how the PDs are situated. If I look at it as a building, I see the top floor, right? But I don't know floor number two, floor number one, and even the basement if it's there, there is
Basement.
any. So there is no way of knowing unless you are with the patient in therapy for a long time. That is second. So most people don't even know about it. If you know about it, then the question comes up of the arrangement of the PD and criticality of some PD over the others. Right? And how society plays a role here? Society plays a role, as I said before, in mixed PDs. When it comes to mild, it plays a role in formation, in intensity, in arrangement, in transfer, and in intensity transfer. When it comes to moderate
Intensity.
PDs, doesn't play a role much in formation, but plays a role in arrangement and plays a role in intensity transfer and very rarely complete PD transfer.
Transference.
In case of severe, doesn't play much role in formation, but plays some role in intensity and uh, somewhat role in arrangement
Intensity of transfer.
and intensity transfer. It will not be able to exhaust one and submerge into something else, but intensity transfer will be there. And in case of mixed PD, right, again the same things, that as you move from mild to severe, the role society plays will go down, but society always will play a role in arrangement of mixed PDs and in inter PD transfer within that constellation. So that is how we see mixed PD and society working together. Lacan's big other and this whole world of PD in terms of formation, intensity, arrangement, complete transfer, and intensity transfer.
It brings up, doesn't the area of culture and mental health history may not be under control, but culture largely is?
It's a very good question, because once you say society has a role, the second question is what do we do about it? Because now that we have identified society as a role to play in so many areas of PD, the question is what to do. And the answer is to develop consciously a good culture where women don't have to go out to work for the first 5 years. Society pays them something, and the woman is with the child as far as it is possible. Because there is an inevitable clash between the rights of the child and the rights of the woman. And
True.
if the woman's rights are violated, they are temporary. They are violated for 5 years. But the child's rights, as they are violated, they'll be violated for life. So between the two evils, it is better to allow violation of the rights of the woman than to allow the violation of rights of the child. And I can say that from my personal experience that my mother was a working mother, and I would not like any other child's mother to be a working mother. It's a very difficult childhood. And the same with what happened with Vinaycott. Right? Not exactly, I mean, I never went to a hostel, but I'm talking about the loss of the mother very early. So society has to create a conscious culture. In the time of internet, it's possible that we can have a global debate on culture, and we can use all the knowledge that we have from psychoanalysis and other areas. We can go into the child upbringing practices of ancient people, of tribes, right, of various cultures, and from there have a debate, and then develop practices and try them out and see how they happen. And over a period of time, we will be able to develop a healthy, sustainable culture. Unfortunately, in the history of humanity, the Vedic culture was the only culture which was a designed culture. All other cultures just emerged in the flow of
Hmm.
things. They were not designed, they emerged in the flow of things. Now, whatever emerges in the flow of things is not necessarily a well considered construct from every angle. So, just as it happened in the Vedic times, we'll have to sit and consciously develop a culture using insights from spirituality, psychoanalysis, and all other areas that we have. It's a theme that United Nations and WHO should be taking up, but I don't think they really have the courage to face the left assault.
Coming back to the transfer from histrionicity to narcissism, how do we understand it?
Uh, Broadly speaking, sexuality has been normalized, and so histrionicity goes. At least that part of hysteria goes. And early life object loss and entitlement are normalized, so narcissism is accelerated. So we see clearly one factor in society inhibiting hysteria and histrionicity. The
So
second,
is that element of histrionicity, if we see it as pathology, is opposite of wokeism
uh, one part is
in
this.
the pathological sense?
So let us look at the early life object loss uh, resulting in personality disorders. Now, that has been increased. Now, what happens is obviously mild, moderate, and severe all cases will be generated, right? But society will have a larger role, as we said, in mild, little less in moderate, even less in severe. So, what has happened is one, uh, the repression driven histrionicity is gone, right?
Exactly.
Object loss driven and entitlement driven narcissism has been increased. Third, very importantly, uh, living out histrionicity also is partly normalized. What we call normal public behavior today, a few years back would have been called public display of affection. So yesterday's PDA is today's normal behavior.
Onwards.
So much of histrionicity has been normalized. Right? The seduction component has been completely normalized. It's normal today to dress up and act in a way to be seductive, to be appealing. And in some countries, it's even more than the others. South Korea is a good example.
Mm.
So part of the whole thing is ki the yesterday's taboo, which was generating a problem, is normalized. So that goes down. Second is living it out is normalized. So even if by yesterday's standard you are a PD, by today's standard you are not a PD. So it appears as though that PD has gone down because it has been normalized.
But
The-
that is only in the external context. In the internal context, this is where we started with the conversation. In the inner, the phenomena is taking place there.
Correct.
It is not being repressed, is something else. So
Correct.
it takes up a different form, but the inner mechanisms remains the same.
True. So what we are looking at is that if you look at the Valley Junction model that we often talk about, that how the transfer is possible at all.
Mm,
Now the transfer is possible because of two things. One, if there is a common root
mm.
from which all the personality disorders are emerging,
Emerging.
then transfer is possible. Or if all personality disorders are emerging only from society interaction, social interaction, then also it's possible because society can disincentivize or incentivize. And we see both are at work.
Mm,
That Valley Junction model is at work and society also is at work. So there will be two things. One, in case of severe generation, right, society won't be able to do much, neither in the formation nor in the manifestation. Even though so much normalization has happened, still the histrionicity will be there. But out of 10 PDs, you will have 2 or 3 severe PDs.
mm.
7 will be moderate to mild. And there,
Right.
society will have a very large role to play. So, one will be that uh, the dismissal of children, the ignoring of children has been substituted by the pampering of children, which is giving rise to both histrionicity and narcissism.
Narcissism.
Right? Second, histrionicity is far more stigmatized than narcissism. And therefore, there will be a shift in moderate to mild from histrionicity to narcissism or intensity from histrionicity to narcissism. Right? That if you have a mixed PD, there is a shift of intensity. It's easier to leave out one than to leave out the other. So these social conditions will bring about a lot of change. That one, you will not count lot of mild as histrionic, which 20 years back you would have counted as histrionic.
Yeah, other elements also, other than the social um, time driven construct, the patriarchy itself.
Yeah,
Histrionicity in men is seen as chivalry, as confidence,
correct.
right? While in women, it was a taboo. It
So,
was that of a slut shaming kind of a thing.
so that is where the social definition comes in. That you did not have a gender neutral definition,
Mm.
right? And
So
there,
these definitions are also governed by society. It's not coming from your internal aspect.
so that part will also affect counting, right? That what you will
True.
count as narcissistic in woman, you may normalize it in men,
Men,
and that will be true in many communities. That the same behavior displayed by men will be taken as normal, and by the woman is will be taken as narcissistic, entitlement oriented,
like for the same example, hysteria was seen more in women than in men.
because they were more repressed than men. Because
Exactly.
essentially, what we see hysteria as in a drive repression terms, it was an explosion of the repressed. So
So
the
there was this aspect where they were more repressed, and also there was no permission for. It was okay for men to be behaving like this.
correct, correct,
Women demanding something for their desires is way too much.
correct. So
So
the
the
moment,
societal definitions of what is normal with regard to genders, with regard to the age group also governs. Again, I'm debating for the society wala part. The
correct,
phenomena remains the same.
correct. So that is where the generation part will be affected.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
one gender bottles up more and therefore is naturally prone to having more of that sickness. The second has more release mechanisms, right, and more normalizing luxuries, and therefore bottles up less, and therefore has less explosions compared to the one who has more bottling up. So that is where the society will effect upon the causation. And then you will also have, so these are definitional effect of society on causation. And this has both the areas. One, how do you cause early life loss, and how do you impact learning? So these two will affect both standalone PDs, their formation, their intensity, their manifestation, and mixed PDs, their formation, their manifestation, their inter-PD transfer, and their intensity transfer. So that is how the two core ways the society will impact. One will be by impacting early life object loss, and second will be over the time learning, which will have impact upon the accepted and the non-accepted, the bottling up and the non-bottling up, the living out or the non-living out. And all this will be nuanced, or say, so to say, uh, discriminatory in some sense on gender terms. Maybe on other terms also. There's also, uh, if we go in that area, how social definitions are different. They are different not only by gender, but they are also different by economics and also by the social classification.
Social
Like in
classifications.
many villages, what is normal for a higher strata person, higher caste person, let me use a rough word, right, is not normal for a lower caste person. It will be seen as uh, a subversion. It will see as narcissism. It will see as flaunting oneself.
True.
So all these nuances will come up when we get into the data and we get into the causation. So we are into an intensely uh, social field where society influences both the early life object loss and PDs emerging from there. And then over a long term learning, over a long term interaction with culture, which will have something is stigmatized, something is not stigmatized, something is accepted, not accepted, something is defined as a problem, something is not defined. Those definitions are contextual to gender or economic class or social hierarchy in some other form. Right? So when we get into that historical epidemiological study of personality disorders, all these factors will play out on the canvas.
So while you're explaining this causation mechanics, how can the transfer be understood? You mentioned in between about the valley junction also.
Huh.
That means some structured and flexibility can aid on to this from the social context.
Right. So let us say you have a mixed PD and both are mild. Let us say a person has mild histrionic personality disorder and mild narcissistic personality disorder. Now, when he grows up from 5 to 15, so let us say Valley Junction model created these two. That
Hmm.
early life object loss happened, Valley Junction model operated, and the end of the Valley Junction model was the person created two templates for future, a histrionic personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, both were mild. And together in a constellation, it becomes a mixed PD situation.
Hmm.
Now,
Right.
5 to 15, he realizes that if he acts out his histrionicity, he gets attacks from society. But if he acts out his narcissistic grandiosity, he gets less attack from society. So there is incentive to live out the narcissistic part more than the histrionic part. Now, two things are possible. One, if the histrionic part is very mild, you can just give it up and live out narcissism. There is an inter-PD transfer.
Right.
Or if both are strong enough that you cannot have one merging into the other, then there can be a shift of intensity. That he will live out less histrionicity because it is attacked and stigmatized by society. Right? And
Right.
he will live out more narcissistic part, which is more accepted by society. So this is how the valley junction will be followed by a transfer of
Transfer.
complete PD or a transfer of intensity based upon the social conditions.
So how would Valley Junction further fit in here?
It would fit in because the valley junction model says that early life causation of personality disorders is essentially from an early life object loss. And different people react to object loss differently. Because the idea is after early life object loss, what happens? And we know from Kleinian theory, from attachment theory, that we can create a picture and we see that validated in practice. The picture is this. After the early life object loss, the first thing that happens is anger. The child uses his aggression and power to get back the lost object. When that does not happen, there is a fear that this attacked object will attack him back. So there is anxiety. First there is aggression, then anxiety. Then after some time, there is sadness that the object has been lost. Then there is powerlessness that despite my crying, my being sad, nothing is working out. So even the use of sadness as an instrument goes away. So then there is powerlessness. Then there is helplessness. That not only I am powerless, but nobody with power is ready to help me. I am not only powerless, I am helpless. I can't even request anybody else's power to help me. So I am more than powerless, I am helpless. Then I am not good enough comes. That I am not good enough because I don't have power. I don't have anything good in me to keep the object of my desire with me. I have been abandoned because I am not good enough to be kept with somebody. And then I don't even have the power. So I am not only not good enough to be had by somebody, I am also not good enough to have the power to call that person back by my power. So I am not good enough is created. And then there is guilt that I must have done something wrong to really lose it. And then there is shame that I have lost it. Maybe everyone has not lost it. So there is a series of feelings that come and they are unbearable, what we call the valley state. That everything was going fine, the vehicle was moving on the road, and then early life loss happens and you go into the valley. And because in the valley, these feelings are at work, you jump out of the valley, not back on the road, but on some personality disorder rock. And the highest jump is to narcissistic personality disorder, the peak. Right? Or you can jump to smaller rocks, which are not the peak, right? And have different templates. So what happens is, what is generated most? A person, all these feelings are generated after every loss, but the intensity differs. Some people, by their constitution and other variables of the personality, right, generate sadness more. Some
Right.
will generate shame more, rejection more. Right? So if you develop inferiority more, you will get out of it by a jump of narcissism. Right? If you have guilt more, that I did something wrong and therefore I left, you will jump out of it with dependence. That I will now please people so that they won't leave me anymore. And I will find what I
Or
have
even
done.
or even histrionicity also.
That will be neglect and dismissal. That
Okay.
I have lost the object because I was not interesting enough.
Right. Right.
Dependence will say I was not pleasing enough. He will say I was not interesting enough.
Interesting.
So he will
Yeah.
jump onto histrionicity. Right? So this is how all personality disorders in the Valley Junction model come out of it. And then the intensity of it, and in case of mixed arrangement of it and transfer of it or transfer of intensity, that is over a period of time a socio-cultural phenomenon. That is one way you can look at it. Second way we can look at it is that it is all governed by society. There is nothing like early life object loss or Valley Junction. Some behavioral therapists will look at it that way, not the psychoanalytic therapists. So this is where so what is important about Valley Junction model is how early it happens and how intensely it happens. The earlier and the more intensity with which it happens. So let us say the mother is not available at 3 months of age for 4 hours. It is very different from mother not available for 4 hours at 2 years of age.
True.
Right? Mother not available for 4 hours is very different from mother not available for 10 hours. Right? So, what is the nature of loss and what is the time of loss? Based upon that, the Valley Junction model will operate in terms of intensity. The earlier the loss and the more intense the loss, the severe will be the PD. And severe is the PD, less society can do anything about it. Later the loss happens, and milder the loss happens, there is more that society plays a role in terms of everything: formation, intensity, arrangement, complete transfer, intensity transfer, everything. So this is how the the power of society and culture and the power of the original event that created the PD, the two interact, and finally we have that matrix of mild, moderate, severe,
Right.
standalone, and mixed. So we will have those 6 types, and the effect of society, right, on in terms of formation, in terms of intensity, in terms of arrangement, in terms of transfer, and in terms of transfer of intensity will be different for each of the 6. So that is how the two come together.
Taking the stand for society aspect again, is normalization of the non-normal in society not a key factor here?
Uh, can you say that again?
Is normalization of the non-normal in
Uh,
society not a key factor here?
it is a key factor. Like it is a key factor in 2 ways. One is statistical, and second is healing. If you normalize something which is pathological, right, you don't call it a sickness. So if you don't call it a sickness, nobody comes for healing. And then entire society and the man himself suffers the consequences of that untreated problem, which is what is the cost individual and society pays for normalizing the non-normal. At the same time, statistically, there is a different problem that you feel pathology has gone down when in fact it has not gone down, because you are no longer counting it as pathology what once 20 years back you would have counted as pathology. And when you don't count it, all sorts of problems will come. The measurement in terms of absolute occurrence will be underreporting. In mixed personality disorders, when there is something mixed, you will call it standalone, because the weaker you don't even count as a pathology. In
True.
case of transfer, there will be problems, because uh, if you don't recognize something, how do you look at the transfer? So full transfer and intensity transfer both will get into difficulties of counting. And similar difficulties will arise if any personality disorder is abolished from DSM as not being a disorder anymore. Then the whole statistics will go haywire. Or if the PDs are rearranged, then what we measured initially when there was a particular definition of a PD, and now out of 10, 2 are taken out, and this new definition of other 8, right? It creates a contamination, a hodgepodge of data. So all these
Right.
are actually problems of normalizing something, of recasting DSM without looking at longitudinal studies and the difficulties it could create for longitudinal studies, and not looking at mixed PDs, and therefore not looking at transfers or intensity transfers. So these are all the difficulties of normalizing, of recasting the chapter, of non-recognition of mixed PDs, of not looking at transfers of two types that we talk about. So these are all the difficulties that we'll find in this area of the historical epidemiological study of personality disorders.
Since we have incorporated in discussion the transpersonal element of history and society, how do we see more esoteric transpersonal elements playing a role?
Another area which um, classical psychiatry is not looking at, the transpersonal element in PD, both in generation, in intensity, in transfer, in intensity transfer, arrangement, everything. That often we find it's intergenerational, and it
Hmm.
stops only when one particular generation becomes aware of it and starts treating it. So this is an transpersonal thing, intergenerational. Second aspect is karmic, the reincarnational aspect, which also is outside of bounds of present science, but there is the karmic element, and then there is self journey element. Many people say that if I did not have this PD, I would not have I would not have achieved in life progress in any particular area, be it intellectual, spiritual, or artistic, without this PD. And therefore, PD has a purpose. And this purpose can be karmic, it can be self journey purpose, it can be productivity purpose, it can be any purpose. So, this whole opens up the transpersonal area of PD and the uh, purpose of PD, the productive aspect of a PD. So
Having
that
said that, does that mean there was ever a possibility if we move 1,000 years back before these different theories were formulated, there were some other PDs existing and uh, now the presentation has changed?
very much so. Not only that PDs existed which are no longer seen, but there are many PDs which exist and are not accepted.
Are
Like
not part of studies.
yeah, like uh, once upon a time in the DSM itself, I'm not sure it was DSM 3 or 4, there used to be PD like negativistic PD. Some people are very negative all the time.
Mm,
It was taken out from the chapter, and I thought it was a mistake. We actually find people with lot of
mm,
negativity and they are sick people,
true.
right? Similarly, we had the sadomasochistic. I think it's still there. If it's not there, it should be brought in because it is an area. Similarly, the woke PD, it is not there, it should be brought in. So you have the situation of PDs once existing, no longer there. PDs once recognized continue to exist today, but no longer recognized. And new PDs which have emerged in the last 5 years, not recognized. So all of these needs a recast of the PD chapter.
Mm. So just touching the technicality, is there any purpose of these PDs other than just coping and survival?
Yeah, there can be a purpose which is karmic, which can be related to self journey, and also on the intellectual spiritual side. Like I can say it for myself that if I did not have the PD, narcissistic personality disorder to be more particular, and other forms of accompanying PD, like for example some traits of OCPD, some traits of dependence, I would not have achieved intellectually or spiritually what I had or what I have. So I would say it is not a unalloyed problem, it is not a condemned sin. It has both sides, the not good side and the good sides. And if you do a cost benefit analysis of a PD, the benefit side of it is not blank.
Should we then expect an increase in PD over next 5 decades, given the current situation?
Uh,
Because all
if
the
our
fundamental theories, what they talked about, those things are just no more part of the society.
if our species develops the maturity and the wisdom to create consciously a healthy good culture, then no. But given what our species is, I don't expect that wisdom from our species. So, in all probability, we will see more personality disorders. And to be specific, we will see more of fragile narcissism, more of schizoid, and more of paranoid, and more of avoidant. But largely, the highest will be fragile narcissistic personality disorder, and schizoid that we'll see on the increase.
So, can we take a specific instance of history shaping PD epidemiology if we have to get a good, clear picture how it moves?
We can see it in all the communities which were uh, in crisis at some point. Say the Sikh community in India, which was not a martial community to begin with, but became a martial community after the Sikh Holocaust and the attack by the Mughals, the Islamic Holocaust, the Islamic cruelty and barbarism that they suffered. So now in that particular community, uh, narcissism, bravery, collective living, that is all at premium, and individualism, histrionicity, avoidance, that is all at discount, because you have to hang together to fight together. You have to obey the uh, principles, the discipline to fight together. You need the courage, the belief in oneself to fight. So, in that culture, some and similar for the Rajput culture, you will have some PDs which will be more acceptable and some PDs which will be more stigmatized, and that will reflect in the occurrence or intensity or arrangement or transfer. If you look in a larger way on the entire Indian population, the Hindu population, because of the 1,000 year of Hindu Holocaust, all that we have suffered, you see masochism, you see
Mm.
anxiety, you see negativity, and you see withdrawal and dependence and servitude very deeply built in. So certain PDs are intergenerational. Fortunately, now times are changing. The new generation is slightly more free of the trauma of the intergenerational trauma of the past, and they are coming out and they are more confident and more courageous. So, uh, I see some sort of uh, revival by some destructive PDs going out in the Hindu culture and some constructive PDs coming in.
Complex but rewarding discussion. Hope the viewers enjoy it too. See you all again. Namaste.
Namaste.